You got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, I mean, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached. We don't impeach them. You know why? Because they're meaner than we are. We should have impeached Joe Biden for 100 different things.
Okay, so here's something that should probably be setting off way more alarm bells than it is right now. Donald Trump stood in front of House Republicans at their own party retreat and openly admitted that he's terrified of being impeached. Not hinted at it, not joked about it. He said it plainly. If Republicans lose the midterms, he's done. He told them they'll impeach him. That alone tells you everything about where his head is right now. This is the same man who has spent years projecting invincibility, mocking investigations, daring Democrats to come after him, acting like the system simply cannot touch him. And now, suddenly, he's standing in front of his own party.
They impeached me. I never knew I was going to be impeached. I get a phone call, you just got impeached. I said, what does that mean? It took them 10 minutes. They impeached the president of the, who did a damn good job. I rebuilt our military, Space Force, I got everything.
Not boasting, not celebrating, but warning them that his presidency depends entirely on their performance in the 2026 midterms. That's not strength, that's fear. That's a president acknowledging out loud that he knows exactly how vulnerable he is. This happened on January 6th, 2026. Trump, surrounded by Republican lawmakers who are supposed to be his firewall, his shield, his last line of defense. And instead of rallying them with confidence or bragging about victories, he delivers a blunt message. You have to win, because if you don't, they'll impeach me. I'll be impeached. Those were his words.
I did a lot. They impeached me for nothing, twice, for nothing. Fortunately, you were on our side, and we were unanimous. And the second time, the few people in this little group, like Rice and this, they're all gone. Every one of them is gone, except one that we're going to sort of let ride with.
And here's the thing. He's not exaggerating. While Trump is privately and now publicly panicking, Democrats and a growing coalition of advocacy groups have already been laying the groundwork to remove him from office. This isn't random outrage or social media noise. This is organized, structured, and deliberate. There are formal impeachment resolutions already filed in Congress. There are campaigns gathering tens of thousands of signatures. There are legal arguments written, refined, and waiting. We're talking about 7 separate articles of impeachment: tyranny, corruption, bribery, usurping Congress's authority over war powers, usurping Congress's control over federal spending, undermining the judiciary, attacking the press.
But we're going to begin tonight with a dramatic day in the Senate impeachment trial. The House managers prosecuting President Trump spent their second day of arguments laying out their case for Article 1 and how they say the president abused his power. The president is taunting Democrats for refusing to make a deal, allowing him to call witnesses in exchange for letting them call his top aides.
These aren't vague grievances. These are specific allegations tied to specific actions. And they're sitting there like a loaded weapon, ready to be used the moment Democrats have the votes. That's what makes this moment different. This isn't theoretical. This isn't maybe someday. This is a scenario Trump himself is treating as inevitable if Republicans lose control of Congress, and when the person at the center of the storm is the one sounding the alarm. You should probably pay attention. What we're watching right now is a high-stakes political standoff.
Mean and smart. But fortunately for you, they have horrible policy. They can be smart as can be, but when they want open borders, when they want, as I said, men and women sports, when they want transgender for everyone.
Trump is telling Republicans explicitly that their losses will be his downfall. Democrats and removal advocates are saying just as explicitly that impeachment is exactly what they plan to do. And sitting between those two forces is the 2026 midterm election, which has now become a direct referendum on whether Trump even finishes his second term. This isn't about policy debates anymore. This isn't left versus right. This is about whether the sitting president survives politically or whether Congress pulls the plug early. And despite how surreal that sounds, it's very real.
All right, we're going to begin this hour with another likely criminal investigation of a prominent critic of President Trump. This time it's Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He faces a Justice Department probe. It was announced on the very same day that lawyers for two other Trump critics were back in court arguing their criminal indictments should be dismissed.
When people hear the word impeachment, a lot of them immediately tune out. They assume it's just partisan theater, just noise, just Democrats venting frustration. But this time is different, and the reason it's different is organization. This isn't scattered outrage. This is a coordinated effort unfolding across multiple fronts at the same time, all aimed at the same moment, the 2026 midterms. There is already a formal impeachment resolution sitting in Congress. It's H.R.E. 353, introduced back in April of 2025. This isn't new. It's been developing quietly for months.
Trump administration housing official is making the same type of allegation against Congressman Swalwell that the administration has made against other political critics of the president, questioning whether the California Democrat engaged in fraud in securing a home mortgage in Washington, D.C.
And it lays out 7 distinct articles of impeachment, each tied to constitutional violations. These are not symbolic charges. They're constructed to withstand legal and political scrutiny. The resolution accuses Trump of acting like a monarch rather than a president, of breaking the separation of powers, of enriching himself through the office, and of bypassing Congress on matters where congressional approval is explicitly required. One of the most serious areas involves war powers. Critics point to military actions, threats, and the use of federal forces in ways Congress never authorized. That's not a minor dispute. That's a constitutional crisis. Then there's the money. Accusations that Trump has ignored, emoluments, restrictions, blurred the line between public office and private business, and treated federal funds as a personal tool. Add to that the repeated attacks on judges, the press, and democratic norms, and you're looking at a comprehensive argument that Trump has systematically abused his power. But the resolution itself is just one piece. Around it, an entire ecosystem has formed. There's a national campaign explicitly calling for Trump's removal. There's a broader removal coalition made up of long-established advocacy groups with legal teams, funding, and grassroots infrastructure. These organizations aren't new to this fight. They've been organizing, training, and building networks for years, and now they're synchronized. On top of that, there are grassroots petition efforts drawing in massive public support. One such campaign has already collected close to 100,000 signatures demanding impeachment over corruption, greed, and lack of accountability. That kind of engagement matters, especially in an election year, because it puts pressure directly on Democratic lawmakers. Act on this, or explain why you won't. And looming over all of it is Trump himself, confirming that this threat is real. He didn't dismiss impeachment talk as fantasy. He didn't laugh it off. He told his own party that losing the House means he's getting impeached. In his mind, that outcome is already locked in if Republicans fail. That admission changes everything. It turns impeachment from speculation into strategy. It turns the midterms into a survival vote. And it makes Trump's second term feel less like a governing project and more like a countdown. The reason this moment matters so much is that even if removal ultimately fails, the process itself would be devastating. No president has ever been removed through impeachment, but every president who has faced it has been fundamentally damaged by it. Trump knows this better than anyone. He's lived through it twice already. If Democrats take the House, impeachment becomes immediate. Hearings begin, witnesses are called, documents are subpoenaed. Every controversy, every scandal, every abuse allegation becomes part of a public televised inquiry. Trump's presidency would grind to a halt, not because he was removed, but because he would be forced into permanent defense mode. That's why his warning to Republicans is so revealing. He's not just afraid of removal. He's afraid of being exposed, constrained, and politically paralyzed. Impeachment strips away control of the narrative. It replaces bravado with scrutiny. And for a president whose entire brand is built on dominance and spectacle, that is catastrophic. The timing makes this even more dangerous for him. Trump can't run again. He's term limited. That changes the calculus for Republican lawmakers, especially in the Senate. Protecting him no longer means protecting the party's future nominee. It means defending a president who may be dragging the entire party down with him. And while conviction in the Senate remains a high bar, constitutional crises are unpredictable. War powers, appropriations, separation of powers. These are issues that can fracture party loyalty, especially when public pressure mounts and evidence accumulates. Right now, polling suggests Democrats are competitive, even favored, to retake the House. If that happens, Trump's own prediction becomes reality. His presidency enters its final phase not as a governing force, but as a defendant. And that's why this story matters. Not because impeachment is guaranteed, not because removal is certain, but because the President of the United States is openly acknowledging that his grip on power depends on one election. That alone tells you how fragile things really are. The next 10 months will determine whether Trump finishes his term with unchecked power or spends the remainder of it fighting for survival under investigation. Either way, the stakes could not be higher. And what happens after that point, regardless of the outcome, is where this really starts to reshape the political landscape. Because once impeachment becomes a live possibility instead of a hypothetical, everything around it changes. Every decision Trump makes gets filtered through the question of whether it helps or hurts him legally and politically. Every move by Congress becomes part of a larger chess match. Governing stops being about policy and starts being about survival. That kind of environment is corrosive, not just for a presidency, but for an entire administration. Staffers don't want to sign off on risky decisions. Advisors start hedging instead of pushing bold ideas. Lawyers become more cautious, more resistant, more focused on protecting themselves than advancing an agenda. And when fear replaces confidence, momentum disappears fast. You can already see the outlines of this happening. Trump's rhetoric has shifted from triumph to warning, from inevitability to urgency. He's no longer telling Republicans how strong he is. He's telling them how exposed he feels. That's not accidental. That's a man reacting to internal polling, private briefings, and behind-the-scenes conversations that the public never gets to see. At the same time, Democrats are being handed something they rarely get: leverage created by the president himself. Trump didn't wait for an impeachment vote to frame the midterms as a referendum on his survival. He did it for them. Every Democratic candidate can now point to Trump's own words and say, "He told you exactly what's at stake." That's powerful. It turns turnout into consequence. And that pressure doesn't just fall on voters. It falls on lawmakers, too. Democratic leaders who might otherwise be cautious are now facing a base that is organized, mobilized, and watching closely. When impeachment resolutions are already written, when advocacy groups are already coordinated, when petitions are already circulating, delay becomes harder to justify. Momentum creates expectation, and expectation creates obligation. For Republicans, the bind is even tighter. Defend Trump too aggressively, and they risk being tied to every allegation, every investigation, every abuse claim that follows. Distance themselves from him, and they risk his retaliation, his influence over the base, and his willingness to burn down anyone he sees as disloyal. It's a lose-lose calculation, especially for lawmakers in swing districts. That's why Trump's warning wasn't just fear-mongering, it was a demand. Win for me or pay the price with me. He's telling Republicans that his fate and theirs are inseparable. But history suggests that when things get bad enough, political self-preservation kicks in. Loyalty has limits, especially when careers are on the line. If Democrats do take the House, the shift will be immediate. Committee chairs change, subpoena power changes hands, oversight becomes aggressive instead of symbolic. The administration goes from setting the agenda to reacting to it. And once that switch flips, it rarely flips back. Even if Trump survives an impeachment vote, the damage will already be done. His presidency will be defined not by accomplishments, but by investigations, not by leadership, but by defense. Every day will be about what's next, what's coming, what's being uncovered. That's not strength, that's erosion, and that's the part that often gets missed. Impeachment isn't just a legal mechanism, it's a political gravity well. Once you fall into it, everything bends toward it. Time, attention, energy, credibility, all of it gets pulled in. Trump knows that. That's why he's scared. That's why he said what he said. And that's why this moment shouldn't be brushed off as just another headline. This is the sound of a presidency that knows it's running out of room. And once a presidency reaches that point, there's no real way to reverse it. You can stall, you can delay, you can try to drown everything out with noise and spectacle, but you can't unring the bell once vulnerability has been publicly acknowledged. Trump crossed that line the moment he told House Republicans that losing the midterms means impeachment. From that point forward, every action he takes will be interpreted through that lens. That's why the next phase is going to feel even more volatile. Trump will likely escalate his rhetoric, not because he's confident, but because escalation is his default response to fear. Expect more attacks on judges, more claims of conspiracies, more efforts to frame oversight as persecution. Those tactics energize his base, but they also deepen the very case being built against him. Every outburst, every threat, every attempt to undermine institutions becomes more evidence for the argument that he's unfit to wield unchecked power. At the same time, Republicans in Congress will be forced into increasingly uncomfortable positions. Every vote will be scrutinized. Every defense of Trump will be cataloged. Every attempt to block oversight will be framed as complicity. Lawmakers who might otherwise try to stay quiet will find it harder to hide. Silence itself starts to look like endorsement when the stakes are this high. And then there's the Senate, looming in the background of all of this. Even if conviction remains unlikely, the mere possibility of a trial changes the calculus. Senators start thinking about their own legacies, their own re-election prospects, their own place in history. Being on record defending a president facing a third impeachment is not a trivial thing. It follows you. It defines you. That's part of what makes this moment so destabilizing. It's not just about Trump versus Democrats. It's about Trump versus time, Trump versus institutions, Trump versus the accumulated weight of his own actions. The longer this drags on, the harder it becomes to contain. Each new controversy doesn't exist in isolation. It stacks on top of the others, creating a narrative that's difficult to escape. Public fatigue plays a role here too. Even some supporters grow tired of constant crisis. The drama that once felt entertaining starts to feel exhausting. The outrage that once felt righteous starts to feel repetitive. And when enthusiasm drops, turnout drops. That's exactly what Trump fears most, because his political survival depends on a motivated base and a fractured opposition. But the opposition is no longer fractured. It's coordinated, it's focused, and it's already moving. That's the part Trump can't control, no matter how loudly he tries. He can threaten, he can insult, he can demand loyalty, but he can't stop voters from deciding that enough is enough. As the midterms approach, this dynamic will only intensify. Every special election, every fundraising report, every poll will be read as a signal. Momentum will be claimed, disputed, weaponized, and Trump will continue to frame it all as a battle for his survival, because that's exactly what it is. The irony is that by admitting his fear, he's made it harder for himself. He's turned impeachment from a distant threat into an organizing principle. He's told his opponents exactly where to apply pressure, and he's told his allies exactly what happens if they fail. From here on out, there's no neutral ground. Every development pushes the story forward. Either Republicans hold the line and Trump limps to the end of his term under a cloud, or Democrats take the House and the confrontation becomes unavoidable. There's no quiet ending to this. There's no return to normal. This is a presidency entering its most fragile phase, fully aware that the next election could decide whether it survives at all. And when a presidency enters that fragile phase, the behavior becomes even more revealing. You start to see decisions that are less about governing and more about insulation. Appointments are made not for competence, but for loyalty. Messaging becomes sharper, angrier, more defensive. The circle tightens, trust narrows, and the focus shifts almost entirely to avoiding worst-case scenarios rather than building anything lasting. That's where Trump is now. Every move going forward will be shaped by one overriding goal: preventing Democrats from gaining the power to investigate and impeach him. That means more pressure on Republican lawmakers to fall in line, more demands for public displays of loyalty, and more willingness to punish anyone who wavers. It's a familiar pattern, but it's also one that accelerates burnout and fracture within a party. The problem is that fear-based loyalty doesn't scale well over time. It works when people believe the leader is strong and inevitable. It starts to fail when that leader publicly admits vulnerability. Once lawmakers and donors start asking themselves whether tying their future to Trump is worth the risk, cracks begin to form. Some may stay out of conviction, others will stay out of fear, but some will quietly start planning for a post-Trump landscape, even if they don't say it out loud. That internal tension weakens the entire structure. Messaging becomes inconsistent, strategy becomes reactive. Instead of dictating the terms of debate, the administration ends up responding to events set by others. And in politics, being reactive is almost always a losing position. Meanwhile, the impeachment infrastructure continues to sit there, waiting. The resolutions don't disappear. The advocacy groups don't disband. The petitions don't vanish. They remain ready to activate the moment the numbers shift. That constant pressure acts like a countdown clock. Everyone knows what happens if it hits zero. This also changes how Trump's second term will be remembered, regardless of how it ends. Instead of being defined by policy or legacy, it risks being defined by constant crisis and self-preservation. A presidency spent warning allies, attacking critics, and dodging accountability doesn't project strength. It projects insecurity. And insecurity at the top has ripple effects everywhere else. Allies abroad notice it. Adversaries test boundaries. Bureaucracies slow-walk directives. Courts scrutinize actions more closely. The margin for error shrinks because there's less goodwill to absorb mistakes. What's remarkable is that none of this required Democrats to make the first move. Trump did that himself. By framing the midterms as a life-or-death moment for his presidency, he raised the stakes for everyone. He made it impossible to treat 2026 as a routine election. He turned it into a verdict. From here on, every campaign ad, every debate, every rally will carry that subtext. Vote Republican or the president falls. Vote Democratic and accountability begins. That's the choice Trump has put on the table, intentionally or not. And once a choice that stark is presented, people tend to respond. Some will rally harder, others will recoil, but very few will stay indifferent. That's why this moment matters more than any single headline or quote. It's a structural shift in how power is contested. The final outcome isn't written yet. Elections are unpredictable. Coalitions shift. Events intervene. But what is clear is that the presidency has entered a phase where survival is no longer assumed. It has to be fought for, defended, and negotiated day by day. And when a presidency reaches that point, history shows it rarely ends quietly. And that's exactly why the next stretch is going to feel so intense, even exhausting for everyone involved. Once survival becomes the central organizing principle of a presidency, escalation is almost guaranteed. Trump doesn't know how to de-escalate. He never has. When pressure increases, he pushes back harder, louder, and with fewer restraints. That instinct may rally his most loyal supporters, but it also accelerates the very forces closing in on him. You can already see how this is likely to play out. Expect more attempts to rewrite reality, more claims that elections are rigged before they even happen, more efforts to delegitimize Congress, the courts, and the press. Those moves aren't about confidence, they're about preemptive defense. They're about laying the groundwork to discredit any outcome that doesn't favor him. And every time he does that, he deepens the argument that he's willing to undermine democratic norms to protect himself. That puts Republicans in an even more precarious position. The closer Trump gets to openly framing democratic outcomes as existential threats, the harder it becomes for lawmakers to stand next to him without absorbing the fallout. Every appearance, every endorsement, every refusal to push back becomes part of the historical record. For some, that calculation will start to outweigh the fear of his base. Behind the scenes, you can be sure conversations are already happening. Quiet ones, strategic ones, questions about contingency plans, about distancing language, about how to survive politically. if things break the wrong way. Those conversations don't leak immediately, but they shape behavior. They lead to half measures, vague statements, and carefully worded hedges that signal uncertainty without outright defiance. At the same time, Democrats and advocacy groups don't need to invent urgency. Trump has handed it to them. His own words turn every midterm race into a referendum on accountability. His own fear gives shape to their argument. They can point to him and say, "He told you what happens if we win." That clarity is rare in politics, and it's powerful. As this dynamic intensifies, the presidency becomes less about governing and more about managing exposure. Legislative priorities fall away. Executive actions are chosen for symbolism rather than substance. Everything is filtered through the question of whether it helps hold the line until November. That's not leadership. That's triage. And the longer that mindset dominates, the more fragile the system becomes. Crises don't pause. International events don't wait. Economic pressures don't disappear. A presidency focused inward, consumed by self-preservation, is less capable of responding effectively when real challenges arise. Mistakes compound, reactions lag, and critics gain more material to work with. This is the feedback loop Trump is now caught in. Fear leads to escalation. Escalation leads to scrutiny. Scrutiny leads to more fear. Breaking that cycle would require restraint and trust in institutions, two things Trump has never demonstrated. So instead, the loop tightens. What makes this moment especially consequential is that it's no longer abstract. There's a date attached to it, November 2026, a clear trigger, a clear consequence. That kind of countdown changes behavior across the board. It sharpens focus, it hardens positions, and it makes compromise almost impossible. From here on out, every political development feeds into that clock. Every scandal adds weight. Every court ruling adds context. Every election result, no matter how small, is read as a sign of where things are headed. Momentum becomes a weapon, and perception becomes reality. And through it all, Trump remains at the center, aware that the facade of inevitability has cracked. He can still fight. He can still threaten. He can still demand loyalty, but he can't go back to pretending none of this matters. This is what a presidency looks like when it knows the ground beneath it is shifting. Not collapsing all at once, but slowly, visibly, and in ways that can't be ignored.